Good afternoon. Welcome to our weekly class in Ethics of the Fathers. We're in chapter 1, Mishna 15, 15th paragraph. Just a few weeks ago, we discussed the teachings of the famous sage Hillel. I got a call from his colleague Shammai. He says, "What about me? I want equal time."
They didn't agree with that.
So Shammai is going to get equal time today. What does Shammai say? Shammai says three things. There's a general pattern in most of these teachings that these sages said three things. The number 3 is a very important number in Judaism. There's a statement in the Talmud that God gave the Torah, which is divided into 3 parts, Torah, prophets, and the holy writings. He gave it to the Jewish people who are divided into 3 classes, Kohen, Levi, Israel. He gave it to them through Moses, who was the 3rd child in his family. He gave it to them after 3 days of preparation, and a whole bunch of other 3s that are added on by other commentators. That the Torah itself is connected to the number 3. What's the significance of 3? When you talk about something and you say there's one thing, it's not challenged. You're only focusing on one thing. So maybe if you challenge it, it would no longer be valid. It would be diminished. So when you have 2 things, then you have a challenge. We're going to see in this Mishna as well. If you want to think about 2 disparate approaches, many people would say, oh, Hillel and Shammai. That's a classic example of disputes. Later on in Ethics of the Fathers, it talks about how some disputes are bad and some disputes are good. And it uses the example of Hillel and Shammai. And here we're going to see how Hillel and Shammai seem to come together. But we'll get to that a little bit later. So what did he used to say? What are the 3 things? Number 1, make your Torah a fixed practice. Simple meaning of that is, Torah shouldn't be just something, you know what, I have a few minutes today, I'll study a little. Tomorrow, I don't have the time. It should always be a fixed time to study Torah. That's the simple meaning. A deeper meaning is, the Torah should be not just fixed in time, that you have a certain time of the day when you study Torah, and nothing could disturb you during those few moments, or many moments, depending on the individual. But it's more than that. It becomes fixed in your soul. It becomes a part of you. And that's why it says, make your Torah a fixed practice. In the book of Psalms, you have a reference to Torah as God's Torah, which it is, of course, and then it becomes your Torah. What's the difference? The difference is, Torah is God's Torah. That means it's not part of you. It's God's thing, and you happen to engage it every now and then. When you say it's your Torah, it means it becomes part of you. And actually, there's a legal consequence of that distinction. A king has to be honored. A Jewish king. If the king says, "Don't give me any honor, I'm one of the boys," he's not allowed to do that, because it's not him that you're honoring. You're honoring the position. He can't forgo his honor. But a Torah scholar has the right to forgo his honor because it's his Torah. It became part of him. So if it's part of you, you have the authority to say, you don't have to give me honor for my knowledge of Torah. So when it says over here, make your Torah fixed, it means the Torah should be something that you could say identifies with you. It's part of you. It's not just something you study like other things, but it becomes an integral part of who you are. Then it says, speak little, but do much. The simple meaning of this is that don't make lavish promises and then in the end do less than what you promised. Promise little, offer a little, and do more than what you offered. And the classic examples of both approaches, a person who says a lot and does little, a person who says little and does a lot, is the contrast between Ephron and Abraham. When Abraham came to bury his wife, Sarah, he wanted to purchase the cave, which is now the place that is still the burial place of Abraham and Sarah and the patriarchs and matriarchs and Adam and Eve. And when he offered to purchase it, they said, no. Ephron says, it's all yours. You can keep it. It's given to you. He was magnanimous. In the end, he charged an exorbitant amount. So he offered very little, and he offered a lot, and he gave very little. On the other hand, when the angels, disguised as people, came to Abraham, and Abraham is still ailing from his circumcision at the age of 100, the age of 99, he offered to give him some bread. He says, I'll give you some bread. And what did he give them? He gave them a gourmet meal. He gave them meat. He gave them everything their hearts desired. He offered little, but he did a lot. That's the simple meaning of this statement. The third thing is, receive all people. It's a mistranslation. Adam does not mean men. It means people. Receive all people with a pleasant countenance. In other words, when you greet someone, don't look at them with a frown. Give a big smile. And welcome them not just with a physical smile, but with an emotional smile, that you're happy. The person should realize that you're happy to have them in your home. The Hebrew word, which doesn't get translated, sever, panim yafos, means a pleasant face, a nice face. Sever, the commentaries say, means the idea that the person should feel that you're happy with them. I guess even if you're not so happy, you should at least fake it to make them feel good. And people will say, but I'm not a faker, I'm an honest person. At whose expense? Someone once said, I don't know who the original author of it is, but I heard it from a few people, that your face is public property. You have no right to look miserable, because it's not you, it's the people who look at you and they become depressed when they see how miserable you are. So make sure the person, even if you're not really that excited to have this guest in your home, make the person feel that you're happy. And of course, ideally you should feel it as well, obviously. So these are the three teachings. Some commentaries say that they correspond to the three pillars upon which the world stands. That's the beginning of the chapter. It establishes that the world stands on three pillars: Torah, avoda, service, prayer, and acts of loving kindness. So he had a message for each one of the three. For Torah, he says, it's not enough to study Torah. It has to be fixed. When it comes to serving God, it's not enough just to serve God perfunctorily. You have to say a little, but do a lot. Make sure that your service is more than what you offer. And when it comes to kindness, you could do an act of kindness and it could be very unkind in the way it's given. The Talmud gives an example of two people who honored their father. One of them made his father do slave labor, and he was praised. And the other one fed his father gourmet food, and he was condemned. What happened? There was a rule over there that in different families, one member of the family would have to serve in the army. So if you had a father and a son, one of them had to go to the army. So the son would have to do hard work. That was his job. He worked very hard. So what did he do? he offered to be the soldier to go into the army so his father would not be conscripted. So even though he subjected his father to hard labor, slave labor, but that was much better, infinitely better than becoming a soldier in those days. Being a soldier probably meant you were cannon fodder. So even though he compelled his father to work hard, he was praised because he sacrificed so much more for the sake of his father. The other guy would feed his father stuffed geese, whatever gourmet food was in those days. But he did it in such a perfunctory way. He just, Dad, here's the food, go eat it. Something like that. There was no cheerful countenance, and he was condemned. Even though he gave his father gourmet food, he enriched his father, but he did it in a very negative way. Perhaps another way of explaining the one about say a little and do a lot. The Hebrew word for say, there are two ways or three ways of saying someone spoke or someone said. You could say emor, daber, or tagid. They're synonyms essentially, but they're not really synonymous. Emor is soft. I'm not sure, it's probably not right, but the English word amorous, which means love, is maybe related to the word emor. But whatever it is, and when God, we just read it recently, when God said to Moses to speak to the women and the men, when it talks about speaking to the women, it says emor. Talk to them softly. You don't have to be harsh. When you speak to the men, you have to be harsh. You have to be tough. The women will accept what you say. You don't have to really threaten them. So emor is soft, loving. Daber is a little harsher, and tagid is really tough. So here it says emor me'at. Don't overdo the softness, the love, the things that you do because you love it. Asay, the word asay means force yourself to do a lot. Whatever you do in serving God, whatever requires more effort and more strain and more forcing yourself to do it, is actually more virtuous than something you do because you love to do it. That's counterintuitive to many people. But Shammai was a tough cookie, and he was saying your main emphasis should be, when you're serving God, to serve God not because you enjoy it, although that's also a desirable thing, but do a little bit less of that and focus more on the things you don't want to do, and you do anyhow, because that's really the sign that you are serving God. If you do it because you enjoy it, that's nice, that's beautiful, that's wonderful, and I'm not trying to diminish that, but it means that you're essentially doing what's comfortable. When you go out of your comfort zone, that's the real sign that you're serving God. Then there's another approach by one of the commentators. If you make promises, there's always going to be a backlash. From whom? From your yetzer hara, from your evil inclination. If you say, I'm going to do this mitzvah, your evil inclination is going to throw in monkey wrenches and is going to make so many different obstacles that won't let you do it. The less you make promises to do things, and the second thing, if you make a promise and you don't keep it, that's a sin, that's a transgression. Even when you have to make a promise, it's always good to say bli neder, and no relation to Ralph Nader. Bli neder is without a vow. That what I'm saying I want to do, but I'm not making a vow. Because if you don't say it and it becomes a vow and you don't do it, you're not only guilty of not doing it, but you also violated the commandment in the Torah not to give a false vow. At any rate, if you say a lot about what you're going to do, you'll discover that you'll find many obstacles, And also you may even come to violate the law of a false vow, of a useless vow. Now, here we get to the real tough question. What does Shammai say? You shall receive all people with a pleasant countenance. Remember the story of Shammai when this convert, a potential convert, comes to him and says, I want to convert to Judaism, but teach me the whole Torah standing on one foot. And what did Shammai do? He took his ruler and he chased him out of the house. And another prospective convert says, I want to convert to Judaism on the condition that I could be the high priest. And another one came and says, I want to convert on the condition that I only accept and only have to embrace the written Torah, not the oral Torah. And he threw them all out. And they came to Hillel, and Hillel embraced them all.
Good cop, bad cop.
And Hillel embraced them all. The one who wanted to hear all the Torah standing on one foot, he told them, don't do what is hateful to you, to others. The rest is commentary, go out and study the rest. He had a response to all three of them, and they all converted, and they all got together. And they reflected on the difference between how they were treated by Hillel and how were they treated by Shammai. And the Talmud says you should not be like Shammai in this regard. And here we find Shammai is the one who says, you shall receive all people with a pleasant countenance. So the Rebbe addresses this question and he gives two answers. One answer he gives, one second. To mute. One answer he gives, that Shammai would of course greet everyone with a cheerful countenance. But when someone comes to you and you're the leading rabbi and insults the Torah, which is essentially what they did, and makes it sound like the Torah is is a worthless piece of information, and you can teach it to all the Torah standing on one foot, he felt it would be wrong for him to give a big smile, because you know what people would say? Even Shammai, the tough, rigid Torah is trivial. He felt he cannot compromise his standards in order to show someone a cheerful countenance. But if it wasn't a matter of law, if it wasn't a matter of compromising the law, of distorting it and belittling it, Shammai would greet everyone with a cheerful countenance. That's one answer the Rebbe gives. Another answer he gives is that usually whenever Hillel and Shammai are quoted, Shammai is always quoted before Hillel. And the reason for that probably is, even though Hillel had a senior position, he was the Nasi, the leader, and Shammai was the deputy, Shammai was a greater scholar than Hillel. As towering as Hillel was, Shammai was greater. And another thing is, Hillel, it says this about the students of Hillel, but it probably reflects Hillel and Shammai as well. Hillel would always quote his adversary first. Because he was so humble, whenever there would be a discussion, he would say, my colleague or adversary, Shammai, says this, and I say this. Usually people will say, this is what I say, and then dismiss what their adversary or their colleague says. So Shammai is usually mentioned first. Here, Hillel is mentioned first. We had Hillel a few weeks ago. Why is Hillel mentioned first? Because Shammai changed his attitude because of Hillel. When he heard Hillel say, be a student of Aaron, pursue peace, pursue peace, love everyone, and bring them close to the Torah, he says, you know what? I was wrong. Hillel was right. And from now on, I'm going to advocate greeting everyone with a cheerful countenance. No more taking my ruler and throwing people out of the door. Cheerful and receive everyone, greet everyone. So Shammai changed. And this is an incredible thing because personalities are very hard to change. You can change your opinion sometimes, but your personality is harder to change. And Shammai was able to change his personality according to this approach. I would like to add something. that there's a difference between Hillel and Shammai. Even though Shammai came around to Hillel's approach of greeting everyone cheerfully and not being tough when he deals with other people, there are two different approaches in this regard. There's one approach where you look at a person, even the person looks like they're not a good person. They're uncouth. They're not cultured. They're not polite. They're not. You don't see any qualities. You look deep down in them and you see the good in them. If you remember the story in the Torah about the patriarch Yitzchak, Isaac, who did he love more of his two sons, Jacob and Esau? He showered more love on Esau. Esau was not a nice guy. He was a hunter. He was a ruthless hunter, and according to our sages, he was a murderer. He was a horrible person. Jacob was a loving person. Was a beautiful person. Was a righteous person, and yet Yitzchak, it seemed, favored Esau. Was Yitzchak so blind to knowing that Esau was really not such a great kid? The answer is, Yitzchak was a well digger. That was his profession. The Torah goes into length to show how Yitzchak made his living from digging wells. Why is the Torah telling us that? Who cares what he did for a living? We only want to know what he did in terms of his spiritual legacy. But why do we have to know that he dug wells?
Depth.
Because he dug into people's soul. He was able to dig beneath the surface and see the good hidden in them. When you dig a well, there's a lot of dirt. But if you keep on digging, you'll find refreshing water. Or you might find some oil. It's even better.
There's the letter of the Baal Shem Tov that talks about when the wellspring spread outward.
Right. My father, of blessed memory, was building a mikveh in Paterson, New Jersey about 70 years ago. And they wanted the two ways of making a mikveh. One way is with rainwater. That's the pool with rainwater, and then you put another pool with tap water next to it or on top of it that connects them. Or you dig until you find a well. And that's even a better, more superior form of mikveh. Very few mikvahs are like that. I guess logistically it's not so easy to do. So they dug to find a well, to find water underneath the ground, and they found a well of natural gas. And they had to plug it right away. So if anyone wants to make money, I'll tell you where to go, because I'm sure nobody there knows that there's natural gas there. So if you keep on digging, you'll find treasures, whether it's water, whether it's oil or natural gas, or some diamonds there. There's always treasures buried. So it depends how you look at a person. If you look at the outside of the person, the external aspect of the person looks very, very bad. But if you know how to dig deep beneath the surface, you'll find the treasures. And Yitzchak, Isaac, who personified the trait of gevura, of strength, of rigidity, you think, well, he's not a nice guy. No, on the contrary, he sees all the hidden goodness in a person. That's the trait of Yitzchak. Shammai was also associated with gevura, with judgment, with discipline, with harshness. But by the same token, he was able to dig deep, and he's able to see a guest comes into his house, and the guest doesn't look like a good person. Shammai was able to see, no, I can see the hidden good in him. So what was Hillel then? Hillel went a step further. When you see a person who doesn't seem to be good and you realize that there's a hidden goodness in them, but when a person says things that are not good, Hillel was able to see the good in what they were saying as well.
The pillar of mercy was the pillar of mercy.
No, Hillel was chesed. Hillel was the attribute, the opposite of Shammai, but he was able, the word Hillel also comes from the word behilo, which means light. And halo in English probably comes from that Hebrew word. So Hillel is related to the word light. Hillel was able to illuminate even the words that a person spoke. I'll give you an example. There are people who say things that are inconsistent with our values. So Shammai would look at the person and say, you know what, I know you're not a nice person, the way you behave and everything, but I know there's some hidden good in you. You have potential. Hillel would see the good in even what they were saying. There's an expression of the Talmud that a person should always study Torah and do mitzvahs even for ulterior motives. Don't desist from doing something good because you don't have the right motives. And then it says why. It says, mitoch shelo lishma, ba lishma. From doing it with ulterior motives, you will eventually do it for the pure motive. So the Rebbe would say the Hebrew word from the ulterior motive could also be translated from deep down within the ulterior motive, there's a pure motive. If you see a Jew who, let's say, Torah for an ulterior motive, the fact that they're studying Torah, even if it's for the wrong reason, but means that somehow they really do it for the right reason. Inside, deep down, beneath the surface, there's a trace of purity in them. And once they do the mitzvah, that purity will eventually shine and come out in the open. So the difference between Hillel and Shammai, I'm suggesting, is that Shammai was able to see the good in the person, not in their behavior or their speech. Hillel was able to take it to the next level and see deep down into what they were saying, that, you know what, they're saying something, it sounds very disrespectful, but you know what, I can sense that deep down there's something there that's more respectful. And that's why he converted this guy. Shammai said, I can't convert him because though he might have some good in him, but his words are horrible. And Hillel was able to see the good in his words as well. Where do we find in a parallel to that? So the Rebbe cites an example of Moses and Aaron. Moses and Aaron had an argument. In the Torah, it's recorded in the book of Leviticus, a technical, legal argument about a sacrifice. And Moses rebuked Aaron for doing something that he thought was wrong, and Aaron defended. And Moses said, you're right. Moses says, it says in the Torah, Moses heard his argument and he liked it. And as Rashi adds, he confessed, he says, you were right. He was not embarrassed to say you were right. Moses and Aaron were like Hillel and Shammai. Moses, let's start with Aaron. Aaron was kindness. That's why Hillel says, be a student of Aaron, who loves peace and pursues peace and loves everyone. Aaron was the personification of love. If you had to draw a picture of Aaron, you'd draw a picture of a heart. Moses was tough. Moses was a leader. He couldn't compromise. He couldn't show his love all the time because he was a tough leader, and he had to be that way because they were tough people. And here Moses comes around to agreeing with Aaron. The two come together. Moses and Aaron come together. And that's what happened with Hillel and Shammai. Hillel and Shammai are opposites, are polar opposites. Hillel is love, Shammai is strength, is rigidity, discipline, power. And the two come together and they both agree that you have to embrace everyone with a cheerful countenance. That's the ultimate goal, where you have the opposites coming together.
Tiferet.
That's the trait of Tiferet, yes. Very good. The Rebbe, in another one of his talks about how it seems that some of these teachings are contradictory in a way. If you devote yourself to Torah, it's fixed in your schedule and your soul. It means Torah is the primary focus of your life. And if you say little but you do a lot, that means you're not only saying words of Torah, you're doing much more than what you say. Who has time for other people? This could lead a person to become very antisocial. And indeed, who are the most antisocial people? Intellectuals, professors, rabbis. Sometimes. Because their heads are in the clouds, and when they're not in the clouds, they're busy doing mitzvahs. So they can't relate to other people. So Shammai says that's no excuse. Even though you're fixing your time for Torah, you're steeped in Torah, even though you're acting a lot more than what you say, that means you're doing a lot of things, you're busy saving the world, how could you spend time welcoming people and showing a cheerful countenance? It's not easy. So Shammai says, no excuses. You have to still embrace them with a cheerful countenance. Well, how could you do it? So the Rebbe says that's the power of Shammai. It's another characteristic of Shammai. It's related. The word Shammai also comes from a word that means to evaluate. When you're judgmental, you evaluate things. If you would only evaluate your own strengths, you would realize you have time for everything. Famous scholar Adin Steinsaltz was a chassid of the Rebbe, a follower of the Rebbe, and he was a workaholic. And he had 3 or 4 projects that each one of them was full time. He translated the whole Talmud into modern Hebrew. He wrote dozens of books. He ran a yeshiva. He had an institution in Moscow after the collapse of the Soviet Union. He was busy day and night. And he came to the Rebbe saying, Rebbe, I have 3 or 4 projects, full-time projects. I can't handle them. Which of the 4 should I drop? And the Rebbe said, add on another one. And he did. That was Shammai. That's the power of Shammai, to be able to evaluate yourself, to realize that you have much more power than you think you have. If you're superficial, that's why you need a Shammai, someone who's deep, who knows more about you that's visible on the surface. Hillel is light, but Shammai digs deep into your core. And if we all dig deep into our core, we'll discover that the good that we have that we may not even be aware of otherwise, and the power that we have to accomplish things that we weren't aware of previously.
How deep are these wells that they would have dug up in Israel?
You mean Isaac?
Yeah.
Right. It's near Beersheba. The wells now. The wells are. I doubt.
Pretty far, right? Pretty deep.
How deep do you have to dig to find water? I don't know. It depends where. But now there's a puzzling passage in the Talmud that when before Mishna, the patriarchs are going to be confronted by God, and God says to them, Abraham, your children sinned. So Abraham says, well, let them all die for the sanctification of God's name. Simply that means they deserve to die to show that God is supreme. He comes to Jacob. Your children sin. So Jacob says the same thing. Let them all die for the sanctification of God's name. He comes to Isaac, and Isaac says, we'll work it out. He made a business deal with God, worked things out, and everything is taken care of. So the question is asked, Abraham is known to be kindness. Jacob is known to be compassion. It's Isaac who's the tough guy. He's Gevurah. He's the one who has all this disciplining power. He was a very rigid person. So it's of all and then that's why it says in the Talmud, when Mashiach comes, who are we going to address as our father? Isaac, because he saved us. Not Abraham, not Jacob, but Isaac is going to be more. We'll identify with Isaac more than Abraham and Jacob. So the question is, first of all, how could Abraham tell God, let them die? And how could Jacob say that? Where's their love and compassion? And Isaac, of all the patriarchs, should have been the more harsh one, and he's the most forgiving and kind. So one way of explaining it is, Abraham didn't mean I want them to die. He meant to say, your children are willing to die for God's name. They've shown you throughout history they're willing to die. And Jacob said the same thing. It means they have great potential. They're able to die in a time of crisis. But God says that's not good enough. I want someone who's able to dig deep into them and produce the waters, and that their qualities should come to the surface. You know, let me, before I forget the story I want to tell.
Sorry.
That's all right. Once one of my kids wasn't doing that well in school, and I asked one of the teachers, how's my child? And the teacher said, she has potential. That's the last thing a parent wants to hear, the teacher saying she has potential. She did have a lot of potential, and thank God she's wonderful. But you don't want to hear that from the teacher, that the child has potential. You want to hear my child gets an A in every course. What Abraham and Jacob were saying, the Jews have potential. If you put them in a horrible situation, they'll come through. You put them in an emergency situation, they'll do the right things. Isaac is the one who's able to even take Esav, who was not a nice guy, and reveal the goodness in him by digging the well and finding that water. Yes. Amos, you were first.
About potential.
So he can go. I'll never mind.
Age before beauty? Is that what you're saying?
And he has both over me.
Okay, yes.
Very famous. One of my favorite teachers, Stolarsky from Odessa. And he can walk on street and saw mother with kid. And he come, touch hand of kids, how gentle, how this, looking nice, and say to mother, congratulations, he will not play violin. It's about potential. Huh?
It's about potential.
Congratulations. He will not play violin, sleep quietly.
Yeah.
So back to this story of let them die. Does death always mean literal death, or can it mean self-sacrifice, where you're willing to let that part of whatever it is die for the greater good?
Well, that's what he's referring to, that these are people who are willing to die for their beliefs. Even though throughout history there were Jews who were not steeped in Judaism. Not only were not steeped, they were against it. They rebelled against Judaism. And when they were told at the point of a sword or a gun, either you convert to another religion or die, they chose to die. There's a story, there's a book called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. It's a very, very powerful story. It was, Yom Kippur was approaching, and the rabbi Spira, who was a Hasidic rabbi, was in a camp, a labor camp, and his followers came to him and said, Yom Kippur is coming, we don't want to do any work on Yom Kippur. Could you get the Jewish capo, who was an anti-Semitic Jew, who hated Judaism and taunted the Jews who were religious, could you get him to get us a job that we don't have to work and do anything that violates Yom Kippur? And he said, are you kidding? This guy hates Judaism. But his followers pleaded with him, just talk to him. And finally the guy agreed. He said, I'm going to give you a maintenance job. You'll have mops in your hand and brooms, and you don't have to do anything. But if a Nazi guard comes in, you'll start working. So, and they're all fasting. Yom Kippur is almost over, but it's still during the day. And the Nazis come in with this capo, with trays full of gourmet food, with meat and potatoes and everything their hearts could have desired. And they tell the capo, tell these Jews to go eat. They knew it was Yom Kippur, and they knew the Jews were fasting, and the Jews would not want to eat. But they wanted to break their spirit. It wasn't just breaking their bodies, it was breaking their spirit. And this capo says to the Nazi, this SS guard, we don't eat on Yom Kippur. He probably ate before. And then the guy said, if you don't order them to eat, I'm going to shoot you. And again he said, we don't eat on Yom Kippur, we Jews. And he shot him dead. And this Rabbi Spiro said, from that moment on, I understood the teachings of the Talmud that says that even the sinners of Israel are filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate is filled with seeds. So I never understood that saying, and now I understood it. So that's what Abraham and Jacob are saying to God. Look, God, you put them in a situation like that, even if they're rebellious, they'll give their lives. And God says, that's not good enough. I want to see something more concrete, something more relevant, not just something in a crisis situation. And Yitzchak was able to say, look what I showed love on Esav, even though he was such a horrible person. I showered love on him because I saw the good in him. And that God accepted, and that saved the Jewish people.